Good afternoon, YouTube. I'm Greg from Greg's Tutoring NYC at gmail.com. Hopefully everybody's doing all right. We're in some interesting times. Um, Recent activity in terms of New York City schools is that they released the New York City High School Guide as well as the Specialized High School Handbook, the SHSAT Handbook. So those are both available. I'm going to talk about a little bit about them today and how to get access to them. So there used to be the New York City High School Directory. It's about 600 and something pages. About a year or two ago, they changed it into the New York City Guide for high schools, the High School Guide. It's about a third of the size. It's also complemented by My Schools access through myschools.com. Okay, and you can get access to your high school information there too. We're going to go right onto the links here and show you how to access it. So about a week or so ago, they released the paper version of both of these. This year, they used to be separate as well. This year, they're together. So it's one guide that's going to have the SHSAT Handbook and the High School Guide together. And I'll show you how to access that in a minute. And so there's some interesting times given that coronavirus has school buildings closed and it's unclear exactly when registration and so on is going to happen. So let me say up front at the moment, registration for the SHSAT at the moment is going to be October 21st, and the deadline for high schools is December 5th. But let me also, so registration is not open yet. So anything we're going to be talking about now is just for information purposes only. High school registration doesn't start until the fall. So they're making the handbook available so you can start looking at information. Same with the SHSAT stuff, so that you can start looking at specialized high school things. So why don't we start by backing off a little bit and making sure we're good. Okay, just let me make sure the stream is live. Okay, it seems to be. And let me bring up some of the information about getting access to these two documents. So let me just bring them up here. Let me make this come in front of everything. Okay, so what you're going to do is go to schools.nyc.gov, and you're going to click on enrollment here. And there's two ways to get access to this manual. One is to go click on enroll grade by grade, and it's going to give a list of all the different age groups and so on. And you're going to scroll down to high schools is one choice, and the other one is the specialized high school choice. So if you click on high schools, it's going to bring this up. And at some point, if you scroll down here where it says documents, there's going to be this here. Okay, so depending on which language you have, you're going to click on this. So if you notice this is the 2021 New York City High School and Specialized High School Admissions Guide. So it's two guides together. A little further down, there's also this guide to the Specialized High School Admissions. All right. They're the same PDF, except in one starts with the High School Guide and ends with the Specialized High School Guide, and one starts with the Specialized High School Guide and ends with the other one. All right. So it's a mixture of the two. Both documents have the same number of pages, and both documents contain the same thing. It's just which of the two guides is first. All right. So you can click on either one of those links and get the document you want. If you're not really interested in the specialized high schools, you probably want to click on the first one here because the specialized high school stuff is going to be in the back. If the event you want to make your way to there. If you're more interested in the specialized high school, click on the second one here because that's going to be the one in the front. Either way, you get to choose among the both of them because there's two separate enrollment processes here that happen basically, where you can pick a specialized high school and you can also pick a non-specialized high school. So you want to have both those choices going on. So depending on which one you click, for instance, if I click the English here, it's actually going to bring that document up. So that's what that's going to look like, and 200 or 300 pages in is the specialized high school one. If you click on the other link, this one here, it's going to bring it up with the specialized high school document is in the beginning of the PDF. These are both PDFs. You're going to go to the side over here, at least what I'm using for Mac OS. This download button right here should be able to get you access. You can also go back to the original page and right click and so on. And it'll also do that depending on which browser you have and things like that as well, as in addition to that. Let me just turn something off here. That way we don't get interrupted with messages popping up in the middle of this. So the other way to do this is when you go into this list here, which was you would drop down on enrollment and go through grade by grade. You can click directly on the specialized high school link. Okay, this looks slightly different than the page we were just at. So if you eventually go down to documents, it's going to have the high school and the specialized one, the same as before. It's also going to have these links here. And what these links down here are, they're snapshots into the same PDFs with different parts of it. So if you only wanted the grade 9 examples, you would click on that. And it would bring those up. So you can download these as well. If you notice, it's starting on page 251 or whatever. Okay, so but these PDFs here, these extra PDFs that you're seeing the links in from here, these are all part of the 2 main PDFs. Okay, so there's that. So let me just see if we're still live. Yes, we seem to be. Okay, so that's good. Now the guide only has certain information about the specialized high schools, and only has certain information about the regular non-specialized schools as well. So if you want the digital version, an online interactive version of the high school guide, you're going to go to myschools.nyc. See my URL line above here? And you're going to go to schools, high school. Actually, if you back up a second, if you just go to the thing here, because it picks up your language choice as well. So if you go to myschools.nyc and go to the bottom of it, it says browse the school directly. You can start browsing, and then it's going to give you your choices of which. So in our case, we're looking at high schools. So once you come here, you can click on what access to subways it at, how large the school is, what sports and activities it has, and there's also other filters, whether you want a screen school, whether there's 9th grade seats available, 10th grade seats, female students only, what borough it's in, and so on and so on. There's a couple of choices here. So that's really what you're getting out of all that. Okay. So once you're able to do that, you're able to get that information from there. All right. So let me see. I wrote down some notes here. So that'll get you the digital access to the both guides. And again, there's 2 forms of it, and each one contains a high school guide and a specialized high school guide. Okay. So at this point, I want to focus on the specialized high school guide. So let me bring that up a little better. Let me go back to here. I'm going to turn this off, and we should be back to that. Okay. So a lot of my students are only concerned about, okay, my display program just crashed. So that's not good. Okay, so give me a second here while I try to bring up another version of that. Nothing like a live stream failing, right? Okay, give me one more second. I'll try to bring that up. Try to walk and chew bubblegum at the same time here. And again, the deadline for submitting applications for the specialized high schools currently is October 21st. And the deadline for submitting applications for non-specialized high schools is December 5th. Okay? Given we don't know if schools are going to be opening and things like that, As well, the deadline for the LaGuardia is also going to be October 21st. So given that we don't know what's happening with the virus and the school's going to open or not, we don't know how auditions are going to go. We also don't know if the actual test dates that they give for the SHSAT, I am doing this from my head, I believe it starts November 8th, is actually going to be the actual dates that it's going to happen on or not, all right? So we need to be aware of stuff like that. As well, often the Department of Education changes deadlines. So whatever dates they're giving out now, if you notice the beginning of this, says October 21st on there. Everybody see that? And then December 4th, they already changed that date to December 5th, I believe. So you want to keep on track of this, no matter how. So again, registration didn't open yet, but when it does, you're going to do it through My Schools. Okay, so a lot of you already have other students, or if your child's going to high school, you already probably enrolled for middle school using My Schools and so on. So if you're not familiar with it, you need an OSIS number and some other information about your child, including a password that would have been provided to you. So you may have to call a welcome center or your guidance counselor to get that code at the moment. Okay. If there's any confusion about it, you can email me at gregstutoringnyc@gmail.com, and I could be more thorough about that kind of thing for you. So this is the Specialized High School Guide, and it contains a lot of information in here. Both guides do. In fact, there's a Specialized High School section to the non-specialized guide as well. So if you go into a specialized high school, you want to read this thing thoroughly, this part of it. You also want to go into the high school guide and read parts of that as well. Okay. What I want to do in this live stream is just talk about this guide in and of itself, just as a guide, in my observations. And then what I'm going to do is a part 2 where I actually read the questions and answers and see how close these two practice tests, there's two practice tests in every SHSAT handbook, how the practice tests in these compare to previous years. So at the moment, I'm just doing this as a top level kind of approach, and I'll do a part 2 to this with more specific stuff. For instance, last year there were errors in the guide, and real stuff happens because last year on the actual SHSAT test, there was more poetry than there ever was before in the past. So we can only use these guides as guides, and it's going to interfere with our practice and stuff as well. So looking through the guide at the moment, there's lots of stuff that's exactly the same as in past years. So there's 2 sections, ELA and math. There's 57 questions per section. The math is split up into grid-ins and multiple choice. There's 5 grid-ins and the rest of multiple choices, 52 multiple choice. The English is split up also into 57 questions, and there's some delineations here on this page here, telling you which is page number 3. If you notice, it talks about number of questions, 9 to 19. So the actual test has a variance of the number of questions. So there's a handful of revising and editing questions in the beginning, and then it flips into reading comprehension questions. So that model, which has existed for about the past 3 years, that's all staying the same. So basically, there's the ELA in math. There's 57 questions each. The math is 5-question grid-in, the rest multiple choice. The ELA is up to 19 questions, revising and editing. And revising and editing is split into 2 parts. The first is revising and editing at a sentence level, and the next is revising and editing at a paragraph level. And then it flips into reading comprehension, which often the kids are used to if you've taken a state test before. This is not like the state test, it's different, but at least they have some familiarity with it. Okay, and there's also 10 field questions in each section. So only 47 questions get scored in each part. Okay, so what's the same is the structure is the same, the revising editing is the same, the English versus math is the same, the reading comprehension looks the same, the grid-ins versus the multiple choice of the math looks the same, and the new changes they implemented 3 years ago seems the same. Nothing else seems different, at least at a superficial level. All right, and scoring appears like it'll occur the same way too. The structure and the format looks the same. I believe the formatting of the text in the actual examples they give looks different. That may or may not matter. When I actually look at the questions and answers and go through the problems, I'll see if that really matters. These things each year, this part of the manual, they change each time. But when you actually start looking at the actual examples and the actual practice tests, the formatting of that looks different than the previous years. Okay? Trying to get to that page. And there's a whole bunch of stuff. Please read all this. It's important to know the instructions. For instance, if a child doesn't know how to bubble in properly, especially in the grid in section, they may get no points for any of the questions, even though they bubbled them along correctly. All right, so it's important to read this stuff. Actually, maybe print out extra bubble sheet pages as you're going through doing some of the practice tests. There's things about you should bring to the test, not bring to the test. I don't really want to cover that in this. In fact, I have hundreds of hours of live streams already on this channel, talking about various aspects about the SHSAT, as well as things that feed into the SHSAT. It's taking too long to get to this page. There's about how scoring works. It's still superficial, though. Okay, so there's the actual thing. Some of these fonts and the formatting here is slightly different than in the past. So I will analyze that and see if it's actually exactly the same or not. So there's issues like that. So at least at the top level down, so far it seems to be everything is in order. There's nothing really unusual. So there's that. So again, on that note, I've done tons of videos already on the SHSAT and things relating to it. What I'd like to suggest, though, is that your child, or if you're the child watching this, the student, do not do the 2 practice tests in this handbook yet. Read it everything else except for these 2 practice tests. If you have third-party material or stuff you found on the internet, do those first. Don't do anything officially from the New York City handbooks this year or in the past yet, because they're the most official documents that are available to you, including the page I'm showing right now. And you want to do those later, maybe it's even waiting as far as October to do it, so that you've gotten everything else out of the way. You want to make sure you're getting your fundamentals and so on. So there's a couple of levels of things. So what do I do in the meantime is what you're going to be asking me. What you're going to be doing in the meantime is making sure you're getting your fundamentals right. Making sure you can ace things like the New York State Math and ELA tests. These are your core requirements. If you read the SHSAT handbook, it professes that the grade 8 SHSAT is only requiring grade 7 material. It also professes that the grade 9 SHSAT is requiring grade 8 material. But it turns out that's not true. It's not even true for the New York State test. So what happens in the classroom is different than what happens in the New York State test. But what happens in the New York State test is different than what happens on the SHSAT. But you have to start somewhere. You have to ace what's happening in the classroom. You have to ace what's happening in the New York State test, and then you have to ace what the SHSAT is asking you for. So there's a hierarchy and levels to bump up and go up and down on. So if you jump right into the SHSAT, there's kids who are geniuses and kids who are going to not really have an issue with prepping or studying for this. But most of you, your teachers and schools didn't do their jobs to get you all the material you need for this, which is one reason you need to prep and study. On top of it is coronavirus, where in some of you live instruction is not happening. So you're missing months and months of school that if you're going to take this in November, that you need to catch up and get that information in your minds and so on. So that's a reason to back off of the exact SHSAT material at the moment, and then work your way back into it. And by the way, I have live streams that talk about some of the topic materials. Let me start by doing this for 1 second there. I'm going to post links to some of the stuff I showed earlier. I'm just going to throw them in the chat for anybody who wants to see that. 1 second. So I'm posting to the chat the My Schools link. Now we're going to post is the schools by schools, and I'm just going to do the one which has the specialized high school one. I'm going to post that. And then what I'm going to post is 2 links. The first link, give me 1 second because I have to bring it up. Yeah. This is an overview of the math topics that are going to be on the SHSAT. So the DOE never releases an exact topic list. There's a couple of reasons for that. Some are probably good and some are probably bad. And in the event, they don't release the list. So this is a high-level bunch of information detailing that I did in a previous YouTube live stream. So this is the math topics. And this will be the ELA topics. Give me 1 second. So this will give guidance so that when you're trying to make sure you're ensuring you got your fundamentals right by reviewing your classwork, looking at your school textbooks, and going over previous New York State ELA math tests, you're going to be making sure you cover these topics. And then when you also, if you have third party like a Barron's or Princeton Review, SHSAT Handbook, or whatever the case may be, you're going to be also looking at those topics and making sure you're getting to them. Remember, again, third party material is never exactly what the DOE is providing in the SHSAT Handbook. However, there's stepping stones into it. Some of the third party material is too easy, and it's not as hard as the SHSAT itself. Okay? Some third-party material is harder, but it's actually more SAT material than SSAT material. That they kind of morph, and they produce a cookie-cutter book, which is an existing prep company like Barron's may have already had an SAT book. What they're going to do is hunt and peck some questions and morph them and twist them and make them into SHSAT questions. So that's why sometimes the third-party books are not the best books in the world. However, there's something, and they will cover enough of the material. So some of them are better than the others. I happen to not like any of them, which doesn't paint a pretty picture. So really just pick one. Even some of the SHSAT, some of the tutoring centers in Manhattan and so on, that do have SHSAT books, there's errors in them and a whole bunch of other issues like that. So all we can do is do the best we can. But again, I wouldn't jump right into SAT and SSAT material. Just work your way into it. There's about 21 weeks or something now up until the SHSAT, or at least the date they're claiming right now. Start making a consistent plan. Work your way up into that. Okay? So there's things like that. So what I'm going to do is, now that the handbook is available, and by the way, printed copies are not available. Some printed copies were sent to people living in shelters and also to people who don't have internet devices. Nobody else is getting a printed copy until school opens in September. So you might now ask me, well, what if school doesn't open in September? Well, I don't know the answer to that. I'm not the Department of Education. So I'm just the messenger. I hope as things improve in New York City that some of the welcome centers might finally open up. Right now they're only available virtually through phone or online. And if they open up, then maybe the printed copies can be available. In the meantime, you can print out a copy. I've printed out a copy. Does waste a lot of paper. This is just the SHSAT part. So we can only do the best we can do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through all the examples in the next day or two and just see if there's any errors in the answers and make an assessment and actually rule in or out how close these two practices are to past year's practices, as well as past year's feedback I've gotten on the actual tests. Okay? Because there's nothing like the actual test day to blow everybody's minds. And if you start now, there's a couple of months to make your way into there where you can go over the core fundamental stuff, spend the summer incrementing and iterating yourself into some place that's comfortable where you're covering enough of the right problems. And then eventually working your way into SHSAT examples. I'm not saying to wait till September to do that, but start now to make sure you absolutely get your core stuff. I'm repeating this over and over because a lot of kids and families just jump up into super hard material, and that is a prescription for failure for most kids. As well, most families, students approaching us, well, let me do 1,000 problems a week. That in and of itself is not going to help a child pass this test. So it's as much about math and English as that is about a bunch of other stuff. It's about pacing yourself. Okay? It's about thinking out of the box. It's about critical thinking. It's even about preparing yourself psychologically to take a high stakes test like this. Okay? It's often said that one of the things about this test is it's a one-shot deal. Yes, it's one shot to the extent that there's only one test day, or a student only gets to take the test once, but you have your whole academic career working your way up to this. So there's a lot of time and a lot of availability and a lot of ways to bring yourself into the right zone for this. So it's not about acing the math section or the ELA section, although you need to do that to meet the cutoff score. It's about preparing yourself academically and preparing yourself psychologically to be able to get to the point of doing stuff like this. On that note, too, remember, there's hundreds of high schools. The specialized high school, there's only 8 of them. There's lots of good schools. You don't have to go to a specialized high school. In fact, for many children, a specialized high school is actually the wrong school to go to. So make sure you're matching your high school to the student and your student to the high school. Once you think you've made that match, then do that. So now that the directory and the guide and the specialized high school directory and guide are available, now you have some modern information, so it's up to date, where you're now going to move into the next step. Okay? And I noticed I put 2020 high school guide on the title of this YouTube, so I'm going to have to change it to 2021. That was a mistake. So on that note, this is really where I want to end. I've given you kind of a high-level overview that everything's more or less seems to be the same. I've mentioned the current 2 deadlines at the moment. I've showed you how to access these 2 documents. So what I'm going to do is go offline in the next day or 2. I'm going to go and read every question and answer every question and see what their answers is and make an assessment and come back and do a part 2 and maybe even a part 3 to this. Again, I'm Greg from Greg's Tutoring NYC at gmail.com. Please feel free to email me. I encourage you guys. This is a hard test. It's a rigorous test. And the high school selection process in general and for the specialized high school is very complicated. It's very detailed. There's many steps. It's easy to get confused. If you don't speak, if English is not your native language, there's a whole nother layer on top of this. Many families, immigrant families, they're still getting used to procedures in the United States, procedures in New York City, and application processes like this and so on. So I encourage you to contact me. I'm available to answer any questions you have about this, and this is what I do. As well as for other tests, for instance, the Hunter test is coming up. It'll have some of the same things that's normally in January. I can help people out with things like that. And again, please, I encourage you to email me, and hopefully everybody's doing well. And with that, peace out, everybody.